In the suffering of prostrate Italy, the name of Rome awakens a solemn and mournful recollection. In 846 AD, a fleet of Muslims off the African coast presumed to enter the mouth of the Tiber, and to approach a city which even yet, in her fallen state, was revered as the metropolis of the Christian world. The gates and ramparts were guarded by a trembling people, but the tombs and churches of St. Peter and St. Paul were left exposed in the suburbs of the Vatican and of the Ostian Way. Their invisible sanctity had protected them against the Goths, the Vandals, and the Lombards, but the Muslims disdained both the gospel and the legend, and their rapacious spirit was approved and animated by the precepts of the Koran. The Christian idols were stripped of their costly offerings. A silver altar was torn away from the shrine of St. Peter, and if the bodies or the buildings were left entire, their deliverance must be imputed to haste rather than to the scruples of the Muslims. In their course along the Appian Way, they pillaged two other towns named Fundi and besieged Gaeta, but they had turned aside from the walls of Rome, and by their diversions the capital was saved from the yoke of the prophets of Mecca. The same danger still impeded on the heads of the Roman people, and their domestic force was unequal to the assault of an African emir. The people of Rome were scared and needed someone to turn to. There was no direct civilian leader to rally behind. The previous pope had died, and so Pope Leo IV was elected to secure the safety of Rome and the Church. This pontiff was born a Roman. The courage of the first ages of the Republic glowed in his breast, and, amidst the ruins of his country, he stood erect, like one of the firm and lofty columns that rear their heads above the fragments of the Roman Forum. The first days of his reign were consecrated to the purification and removal of relics, to prayers and processions, and to the solemn offices of religion, which serve at least to heal the imagination and restore the hopes of the multitude. The public defense had long been neglected, not from the presumption of peace, but from the distress and poverty of the times. As far as the scantness of his means and the shortness of his leisure would allow, the ancient walls were repaired by the command of Leo. 15 towers, in the most accessible stations, were built or renewed. 2 of these commanded on either side of the Tiber, and an iron chain was drawn across the stream to impede the ascent of a hostile navy. The Romans were assured of a short respite by the welcome news that the siege of Gaeta had been raised, and that a part of the enemy, with their sacrilegious plunder, had perished in the waves. But the storm, which had been delayed, soon burst upon them with redoubled violence. A fleet of Muslims, after a short refreshment in the harbors of Sardinia, cast anchor before the mouth of the Tiber, 16 miles from Rome, and their discipline and their numbers appeared to threaten not a transient inroad, but a serious design of conquest and domination. But the vigilance of Leo had formed an alliance with the vassals of the Greek Empire, the free and maritime states of Gaeta, Naples, and Amalfi, and, in the hour of danger, their galleys appeared in the port of Ostia, under the command of Caesarius, the son of a Napoleonic duke, a noble and valiant youth, who had already vanquished the fleets of the Muslims. With his principal companions, Caesarius was invited to the Laternan palace, and the dexterous pontiff affected to inquire their errand and to accept with joy and surprise their provincial succor. The city bands in arms attended their father at Otessa, where he reviewed and blessed his generous deliverers. They kissed his feet, received the communion with martial devotion, and listened to the prayers of Leo, that the same God who had supported St. Peter and St. Paul on the waves of the sea would strengthen the hands of his champions against the adversaries of his holy name. After a similar prayer, and with equal resolution, the Muslims advanced to attack of the Christian galleys, which preserved their advantageous station along the coast. The victory inclined to the side of the allies, when it was less gloriously decided by the favor of a sudden tempest, which confounded the skill and courage of the stoutest mariners. The Christians were sheltered in a friendly harbor, while the Muslims were scattered and dashed in pieces among the rocks and islands of a hostile shore. Those who escaped from shipwreck and hunger neither found nor deserved mercy at the hands of their implacable pursuers. The sword and the gibbet reduced the dangerous multitude of captives, and the remainder was more usefully employed to restore the sacred edifacts which they had attempted to subvert. The pontiff, at the head of the citizens and allies, paid a grateful devotion at the shrines of the apostles, and, among the spoils of this naval victory, 13 Arabian bows of pure and massy silver were suspended round the altar of the fishermen of Galilee. The reign of Leo IV was employed in the defense and ornament of the Roman state. The churches were renewed and embellished. Near 4,000 pounds of silver were consecrated to repair the losses of St. Peter, and his sanctuary was decorated with a plate of gold, the weight of 216 pounds, embossed with the portraits of the Pope and the Emperor, and encircled with a string of pearls.